He thought he was investing in her future. He didn't realize he was financing his own replacement. He called it support. He called it protection. He told everyone he was helping her rise. But what he never noticed was this. Every time he handed her money, she handed him silence. And silence can be more dangerous than rebellion. Because while he bragged about building her, she was studying him. And when the day came that he expected gratitude, she gave him distance. He believed he won. Until he realized she had been preparing to leave from the very beginning. Jack did not meet Nadia by accident. He met her through Perry. Perry was loud, connected, always networking, always introducing people to other people. That was her talent. She believed everybody needed visibility. Nadia did not. Nadia believed in work. Quiet work. The kind that grows roots before it grows branches. It was a Thursday evening when Perry dragged Nadia to a small business mixer held in a modest downtown event space. Nadia almost didn't go. She had deadlines. She had proposals to finish. She had a laptop full of half-built plans waiting for refinement. But Perry insisted. "You can't build alone forever," she said. "At least let people see you." The room was warm, crowded, buzzing with conversations that sounded ambitious but shallow. Men in fitted suits spoke loudly about expansion. Women in heels exchanged social media handles like business cards. Nadia stood near the refreshment table, holding a glass of water she hadn't touched, observing the room the way she always did. That was when Perry walked back toward her with a man beside her. "Nadia, this is Jack," Perry said with excitement in her voice. "He invests in startups. He's sharp. You two should talk." Jack wasn't smiling too much. He wasn't scanning Nadia the way most men did. He looked at her the way someone studies a blueprint. Calm. Assessing. "I've heard you're building something," he said, his voice even. Nadia raised an eyebrow slightly. "I'm building several things," she replied. That answer made him pause. Most people would have pitched immediately. She didn't. "What's your focus?" he asked. "Stability first," she said. "Then scale." That response held weight. It wasn't flashy. It wasn't dramatic. It was disciplined. They talked for 15 minutes. Not about romance. Not about appearances. About structure. About market gaps. About strategy. Jack asked direct questions. Nadia answered without exaggeration. She did not flirt. She did not try to impress him. She explained her goals like someone explaining a schedule, not a dream. When the conversation ended, Jack simply said, "You think in frameworks. That's uncommon." She shrugged lightly. "Frameworks prevent collapse." He nodded once. That was the first time he noticed her fully. Not because she was seeking him, but because she wasn't. After that night, Jack asked Perry about her. Not about her relationship status. About her work habits. About her discipline. Perry laughed. "She works like she's running out of time," she said. "She doesn't depend on anybody." That intrigued him more than attraction would have. So a week later, he reached out. Not with flowers. Not with compliments. With a question. "Can we discuss your projections?" Nadia agreed. Carefully. And neither of them knew that what started as a conversation about business would slowly turn into something far more complicated than either expected. Their second meeting wasn't romantic either. It was structured. Nadia chose the location, a quiet cafe near her workspace where she could leave anytime if she felt uncomfortable. Control mattered to her. Jack arrived exactly on time. Not early. Not late. He carried no flowers, no dramatic gestures. Just a slim folder. "I reviewed what you sent," he said after they ordered. Straight to the point. Nadia studied his face carefully. "And you're underestimating your value," he replied calmly. "Your margins are conservative. You think like someone afraid of losing, not someone prepared to win." That statement lingered. Most people either overhyped her ideas or dismissed them. Jack dissected them. It felt serious. He began offering insights. Not emotional validation. Strategic suggestions. He spoke about positioning, leverage, and patience. He didn't flirt. He didn't compliment her appearance. He complimented her discipline. "You're disciplined," he said once, leaning back in his chair. "That's rare." She didn't smile. She simply nodded. "Discipline keeps me independent." That word, independent, sat between them like a boundary line. Over the next few weeks, their conversations continued. Always about growth. Always about numbers. Jack began sharing pieces of his world too. He wasn't just an investor. He controlled certain industries quietly. Logistics. Clubs. Import routes. He never called himself a mafia boss. He didn't need to. The way people responded to his name explained enough. Still, he never approached Nadia romantically. He made that clear. "I respect your focus," he said one evening. "I'm not here to distract you." That made her relax slightly. Not fully, but slightly. Then he started helping. Not aggressively. Not in a way that felt like ownership. He would cover a short-term production cost when a supplier delayed payment. He would connect her with someone reliable. He framed it carefully. "It's not charity," he would say. "It's strategic alignment." Nadia didn't want to depend on anyone, but she believed in collaboration. She told herself this was partnership, not reliance. What she didn't notice was how often Jack started asking follow-up questions. "Who else are you meeting? Who advised you to make that decision? Why didn't you tell me before you finalized that contract?" The questions weren't loud. They were subtle, almost protective. And when she challenged one of them lightly, he smiled. "Relax. I'm just looking out for you." At that time, it still felt harmless. She didn't see the shift yet, but it had begun. Jack's tone changed slowly, almost politely. At first, it was small remarks hidden inside praise. "You're brilliant, but sometimes you move too emotionally." Or, "You should have asked me before signing that." Nadia would pause, confused. She wasn't emotional. She was strategic. But he said it with such calm certainty that it made her second-guess herself. He still didn't call it a relationship. He still introduced her as a driven woman I respect. Yet his expectations were growing. If she didn't answer his call immediately, he would send another message. Not angry, just pointed. "Busy?" If she mentioned meeting a male colleague, his voice would cool. "Interesting. You didn't mention him before." Nadia felt the shift but couldn't fully name it. He never yelled. He never insulted her publicly. Instead, he questioned her judgment privately. He would assist her financially when necessary, then later say, I hope you remember who stands behind you." That sentence lingered longer than it should have. One evening, after she finalized a small partnership without telling him, he grew unusually quiet. They sat across from each other in his office, the city lights reflecting faintly through the glass. "Why didn't you consult me?" he asked. His tone wasn't loud. It was controlled. Nadia folded her hands calmly. "Because it's my business." Silence stretched between them. Jack leaned back slowly. "You think I'm trying to control you?" he asked. She hesitated. "I think you're used to control." He exhaled softly, almost disappointed. "Nadia, I've invested in you. I protect what I invest in." There it was. Not partnership. Investment. She felt something tighten in her chest. "I didn't ask to be owned," she replied carefully. He smiled faintly, but the warmth was missing. "Owned? That's dramatic." He stood and walked toward the window, hands behind his back. "You know how many men would have left you to struggle? I didn't." That sentence felt heavier than any insult. It implied she needed rescue, that she was fragile, that her growth depended on him. Nadia didn't argue. She simply observed. His words were no longer about support. They were about leverage. And something inside her shifted. Not loudly. Not angrily. Quietly. She realized she needed to prepare for something she hadn't planned for. Not heartbreak. Not betrayal. But detachment. Because when assistance turns into ownership, independence becomes dangerous. And Nadia was never built to be owned. Jack began apologizing in patterns. That was the part that almost kept Nadia confused. He would question her decisions, imply she was careless, suggest she was naive about the world he understood so well, and when she finally grew quiet, he would soften. "I'm just trying to protect you." Or, "I push you because I see your potential." The apologies were smooth, practiced. They came wrapped in logic. And for a moment, they would sound reasonable. But the behavior never stopped. If Nadia defended herself, he would tilt his head slightly and say, "You're always defensive." If she explained her side, he would respond, "You're misunderstanding me." Slowly, conversations turned into subtle interrogations. "Who did you meet? Why did you meet them? Why didn't you tell me first?" He never shouted. That would have been easier to confront. Instead, he made her feel as if she was constantly on trial for existing independently. When she succeeded in something without his help, he would congratulate her publicly, then privately ask, "So you don't need me anymore?" The question wasn't insecure. It was strategic. He wanted reassurance. Not affection, control. Nadia began noticing something deeper. Jack did not fear losing her emotionally. He feared losing influence. The money he occasionally provided had become symbolic currency in his mind. Each dollar was a silent reminder that he had contributed to her progress. And because he contributed, he believed he had earned authority. One evening, during a quiet dinner, he leaned forward and said casually, "You know, without the connections I opened for you, things would be slower." Nadia set her fork down gently. "Slower doesn't mean impossible." He smiled, but his eyes hardened. Confidence is attractive. Overconfidence is dangerous. There it was again. The warning disguised as wisdom. Nadia went home that night and opened her laptop. Not to work, but to calculate. She reviewed every financial record, every transaction he had ever assisted with, every opportunity he had introduced. She separated what was truly his influence from what was her effort. The numbers told a different story than his ego did. Yes, he had helped, but she had built, brick by brick, strategy by strategy, discipline by discipline. The realization didn't make her angry. It made her calm. Because once you see the illusion clearly, it loses power. Jack thought he was shaping her. He didn't realize she was studying him. And the more he spoke, the clearer his pattern became. Apologize. Repeat. Apologize. Repeat. But Nadia wasn't confused anymore. She wasn't defensive. She was preparing. Jack's shift from subtle to strategic happened so quietly that if Nadia had been less observant, she would have mistaken it for concern. He started planting seeds in conversations that weren't directly confrontational but were carefully designed. "People talk," he would say casually. "When a woman rises fast, they assume something." He never finished the sentence, but he didn't need to. The implication hovered in the air long after he left. He began asking about her male colleagues more frequently. Not accusing. Not yet. Just curious. "That investor you mentioned, how long have you known him?" "The mentor you're meeting tonight, is he married?" He disguised suspicion as protection. Nadia noticed the pattern immediately. Every time her world expanded, his questions tightened. The more independent she appeared, the more he attempted to insert himself into the narrative of her success. When she received recognition at an industry networking event, he congratulated her publicly, then later said, "Just be careful. Success attracts the wrong kind of attention." She looked at him carefully. "From who?" He held her gaze for a moment too long. "Men who think you're available." That was when Nadia understood something important. Jack didn't see her growth as shared victory. He saw it as a risk. Not because he cared about her reputation, but because he feared losing control over the story he had constructed about her. He liked saying he supported her. He liked telling others he was behind her success. It made him feel powerful without stepping into the spotlight. But now, people were noticing Nadia without referencing him. And that unsettled him. One evening, during a small gathering with mutual acquaintances, Jack joked, "If Nadia ever leaves me out of her empire story, I'll start charging interest." The room laughed. Nadia smiled politely. But inside, something hardened. It wasn't the joke itself. It was the possessiveness hidden beneath it. She had never belonged to him. They had never defined a relationship. He had been the one to insist he was just a friend supporting her dreams. Now his language carried ownership. Later that night, when they were alone, she addressed it calmly. "You talk about my life like it's partly yours." He shrugged. "Isn't it?"
She didn't argue.
She didn't defend. She simply observed. The mask was slipping. And the more it slipped, the clearer his insecurity became. He wasn't supporting her anymore. He was positioning himself. Nadia walked away from that conversation knowing something had changed. Not in him, he had been consistent, but in her. She was no longer questioning whether his words were harmless. She was recognizing the strategy behind them. And once you see strategy, you can plan your response. 1 week later, the first real insult landed without disguise. It wasn't wrapped in humor. It wasn't softened with advice. It was direct. Nadia had just returned from a late strategy session with a small tech startup she was consulting for. Her phone buzzed before she even removed her heels.
"Jack,"
she answered calmly. "You're busy again," he said, his tone flat. "I told you about this meeting." "With who?" "The founders." A pause. Then a short laugh that carried no humor. "Nadia, be honest. Do you enjoy this attention?" She felt the shift immediately. What attention? Men funding your ideas. Men inviting you to private sessions. Men pushing your career. The implication was no longer subtle. She inhaled slowly. "You're crossing a line." "I'm protecting you," he replied sharply. "From what?" "From yourself." That sentence stayed in the air longer than anything else he had ever said. Protecting her from herself. Nadia sat down slowly at her desk, the same desk where she had built her dreams long before Jack ever appeared. "You don't get to rewrite my story," she said quietly. "I worked before you. I will work after you." He exhaled through his teeth. "You think these men see you for your mind?" Silence. Then he softened his voice. "I'm just worried about your image." That was how he operated.
Strike.
Retreat. Reframe.
She didn't argue further that night.
She ended the call politely. But something inside her recalibrated. The next morning he sent flowers. A large bouquet. No apology message. Just a card that read, "You know I care."
That was his pattern.
Disrespect, then gifts. Accusation, then reassurance. As if affection could erase the sting of words. As if generosity could blur the insult. Nadia stared at the flowers for a long time before placing them in a corner instead of her desk. She refused to let beauty distract from behavior. Later that week, during another conversation, he said something that confirmed her suspicions. "You're always defensive." She looked at him steadily. "Because you're always questioning." He shook his head.
"No.
You just don't like accountability." That was when Nadia understood the real danger. He wasn't just insecure. He was redefining her reactions as flaws. If she defended herself, she was dramatic. If she stayed silent, she was guilty. If she succeeded, she was suspicious. There was no winning inside his narrative. And that realization didn't break her. It clarified her. Because once you recognize a cycle, you stop trying to fix it. You start planning how to exit it. The humiliation did not start online. It started in private conversations that slowly shifted tone. Jack would call late at night and question who Nadia had been with, how long she stayed, why she laughed too loudly in certain rooms. When she calmly explained, he would sigh as if disappointed. "You don't realize how men think," he would say. "I'm telling you because I care." Care had become his disguise. The more her projects gained visibility, the more his suspicion grew. When a small business podcast invited her to speak about women in tech, he didn't congratulate her. He asked who the host was. "Is he single?" Nadia felt the insult land, but she didn't react the way he expected. She answered factually detached. That detachment irritated him more than anger would have. "You're becoming cold," he accused. She didn't say what she was thinking. "I'm becoming aware." One evening, they met for coffee at a quiet lounge. He leaned forward across the table and said, "People are talking." Nadia held his gaze. "About what?" "About how fast you're rising. About who might be helping you." The implication was heavy. She felt heat rise in her chest, but her voice remained level. If you have something to say it clearly. He hesitated, then delivered it bluntly. Sometimes it looks like you're using attention to climb. There it was. The word he hadn't dared to say before. Using. As if her competence needed to be justified. As if her growth required suspicion. Nadia stood slowly. Not dramatically, not loudly. Be careful, Jack, she said. You're confusing your insecurity with insight. He grabbed her wrist gently but firmly. Don't twist this. I've invested in you.
Invested.
The word echoed, as if her success was a return he expected control over. She removed his hand calmly. Support is not ownership. That night, he sent messages apologizing. He blamed stress. He blamed pressure. He blamed love he claimed was growing inside him. But apology, without change, was repetition. Nadia began documenting conversations. Not to expose him. To remind herself she wasn't imagining the pattern. Because that was the most dangerous part. The slow attempt to make her doubt her own clarity. But Nadia did not doubt easily. She observed. And once she saw the truth clearly, she stopped trying to defend herself inside a narrative he had already written for her. The first public humiliation did not look like humiliation at all. It looked like concern disguised as commentary. Jack posted a subtle message online about women who forget who stood by them when they were unknown. He did not mention Nadia's name, but the timing was too precise. People who followed both of them connected the dots instantly. Comments began to appear.
Wow.
That's deep. Some people don't appreciate real support. Nadia stared at the screen longer than she should have. Not because she felt guilty, but because she understood strategy. This was not an emotional outburst. It was positioning. He was planting doubt in an audience before she even realized she had won. When she called him, he sounded calm. It wasn't about you, he said smoothly. Why would you assume that? She almost laughed at the manipulation. Because you tagged the event I just spoke at. Silence. Then a sigh. You're becoming defensive again. There it was. The flip. He insulted. She reacted. He accused her of reacting. I won't fight you online, she said quietly. Good, he replied. Because that would look ungrateful. The word hit harder than the post. Ungrateful. As if ambition was betrayal. As if growth required permission. Over the next few weeks, the posts became sharper. Not direct attacks. Just implications. Some people confuse independence with arrogance. Money changes people. Loyalty is rare. Each one crafted carefully enough to avoid confrontation but strong enough to shape perception. Nadia did not respond publicly. Instead, she did something far more dangerous. She stopped explaining herself to him privately. She stopped defending her schedule. She stopped answering late-night interrogations about who she met and why. She redirected that energy into execution. She registered her company officially. She secured 2 private investors who did not demand emotional access in exchange for belief. She hired a small legal consultant. Quiet moves. Strategic moves. When Jack noticed the shift, he tried a different tactic. Gifts arrived at her office. Expensive. Visible.
Public.
A bouquet with a card that read, "Proud of the woman I'm shaping." She returned it. No scene.
No announcement.
Just returned. That evening, he called furious. You embarrassed me. Nadia's voice was steady.
No, Jack.
You embarrassed yourself. The silence that followed was not confusion. It was the first crack in his control. Because he realized something unsettling. She was no longer reacting to him. She was building past him. The more Nadia withdrew emotionally, the louder Jack became. Not physically loud. Strategically loud. He started telling mutual acquaintances how he had elevated her mindset. He hinted that without his early support she would still be figuring things out. The narrative he built painted him as architect and her as project. Nadia heard it all. People talk. Especially when money and pride are involved. One evening at a small industry gathering, Jack made the mistake of saying it in front of her. I always believed in her before anyone else did, he told a circle of investors. Sometimes people forget who funded their first real move. The room shifted. Subtle glances. Curious eyes. Nadia smiled. Not forced. Not bitter. Controlled. Belief is free, she said calmly. Execution is not. The air tightened. Jack laughed it off.
See?
Defensive again. But this time she didn't argue. She didn't explain. She didn't even stay. She excused herself, walked out into the night air, and made a decision that would change the entire balance. The next week, she publicly announced her new partnership with 2 independent backers. No drama, just strategy. The press release did not mention Jack. It didn't need to. Her growth spoke louder than his claims. That was when he panicked. His calls became urgent. His tone shifted from pride to possession. You're moving too fast. You're making decisions without consulting me. After everything I've done? The phrase became his weapon. After everything I've done. Nadia finally understood the psychology. He never gave to empower. He gave to anchor. He needed her slightly below him so he could feel necessary. And the moment she rose on her own, it felt like betrayal. One night he showed up at her office unannounced. Not angry. Not shouting.
Calm.
Dangerous calm. You think you're bigger now? He asked softly. Nadia met his eyes without flinching.
No.
I think I'm freer. That word unsettled him more than any insult could have. Free meant she no longer required permission. Free meant she could leave. Free meant his influence had limits. He stepped closer. You'll regret shutting me out. She stepped back, not in fear, but in clarity. I'm not shutting you out, Jack. I'm outgrowing you. And for the first time since they met, the silence between them did not feel like tension. It felt like the end of leverage. The day Nadia officially cut financial ties with Jack, there was no explosion.
No shouting. No dramatic goodbye.
Just paperwork. She transferred the final amount he had once assisted her with back into his account, including a small interest margin calculated down to the last dollar. The receipt was emailed. Subject line, cleared. He called immediately. She didn't answer. He sent messages. You're being dramatic. You didn't have to do that. You're trying to prove a point. She finally replied with one sentence. No, inclusion acepted. What unsettled Jack wasn't the money.
It was the symbolism.
He could no longer say he built her. He could no longer claim ownership over her growth. The leverage he had used in quiet conversations was gone. For weeks he tried to reinsert himself, through concern disguised as care. Are you eating well? You look stressed. You know you don't have to do everything alone. But the tone no longer worked. Nadia had changed. Not colder. Clearer. She stopped over-explaining. Stopped defending. Stopped responding to accusations that had once made her question herself. When he hinted that other men would eventually see through her, she smiled and said, "The right ones won't need to." The real shift wasn't financial. It was psychological. She no longer felt the urge to correct his narrative. She didn't fight for validation.
She didn't argue about respect.
She simply removed access. Access to her time. Access to her progress. Access to her peace. Months later, Nadia stood in her own workspace, signing a contract that had nothing to do with Jack's network or influence. Her team celebrated. Cameras flashed. Her name carried weight on its own. That night, she sat alone at her desk, not overwhelmed, not emotional, just grounded. She thought about the girl who once almost believed she needed permission to rise. She thought about the nights she defended herself against suspicions she never deserved. And she realized something powerful. He didn't break her spirit. He revealed its strength. Jack eventually stopped calling. Pride can only stretch so far before it snaps. But by then, Nadia no longer cared whether he watched from a distance or disappeared entirely. Because the truth was simple. He tried to own her with money. She let him think he had influence. And while he measured control, she measured growth. In the end, he lost nothing financial. But he lost something far more expensive. The illusion that he was the reason she succeeded. Some people try to control with money. Some people try to control with fear. But the strongest power is knowing when to walk away quietly. If you stayed till the end, thank you. Your support means more than you know. If this story touched you, inspired you, or reminded you of your own strength, leave a comment. I read every single one. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you don't miss the next premium story. More powerful stories are coming. And trust me, the next one will hit even deeper. Thank you for watching and supporting this channel.